strange. Now, I do want to start off with a few kind of ground rules really quick before we get started. And I'm just going to share my screen. All right, so there we go. All right, so the goal of this program is to study Abrahamic stories alongside each other. We're hearing stories that may be familiar to some, different to others, and we're also going to really encourage this perspective taking by looking at these stories from new points of view. Both of these are kind of like that whole making the familiar strange and the strange familiar type of concept, so that we can see these stories with new eyes and kind of with more depth. Now, the ground rules are, this is a really, this is a hybrid program between learning about the stories and discussing them. But when you discuss, please be as respectful as possible. Challenge your own assumptions and try to use I statements where you can. I read it this way, I believe this. And to think about how for this program, there is no wrong answer. We're just having discussion and learning about it from new perspectives. And just a quick announcement. So we're going to be having Rebecca Morello from Countryside as the guest next month. She'll be talking about Bathsheba, and I don't remember if that's up on the website yet, but I'll be sending out a recap with that event information. And then also on April 1st, I'll be teaching an Abraham's whiteboard in the evening about early Christianity and Gnosticism, so that we can kind of make the familiar strange and the strange familiar historically too. So, and I'm very happy today to be able to introduce you to Nassiba Adjerid. Is that the correct pronunciation? And I will let her introduce herself and continue the program.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Nassiba Adjerid, and I am a professor at the College of St. Mary. I was there as an adjunct for about 2 years, and now this is my second year being full-time. I want to thank Jeremy and the Tri-Faith Initiative for thinking of me for this program. I was contacted by AMI to try to speak about something, or try to speak about an event or a person or a story really from the Islamic point of view, and a story that we can really share, among the Abrahamic faiths. And so I heard Amal's presentation, I think a few months ago, and then I joined last month for the Ruth presentation, and I was really sort of inspired to speak about a figure, a female that has sort of an important role in in Islamic history. So she, today, as Jeremy mentioned, I'm going to be talking about Asiya, who was the wife of Pharaoh. Okay, and I chose Asiya as the topic of discussion today because she really just, for me, symbolizes and embodies the character of a strong and God-fearing woman. She had to stand firm in the face of adversity, and she showed great courage during really difficult times. And she did that while holding a position of power and importance. So she was the queen. Okay, at a time when, Pharaoh was the king of the land, he was the most powerful man in Egypt. He was also, considered himself God, and those followers of his, saw him as a holy figure. And so she was, the second in command, or the person by his side. So over her time, over her life, she kind of took on many roles. And so she was a mother, she was a caretaker, she was a wife, she was a queen, and most of all, she was just a strong woman with strong convictions. And so I would like to start sort of introducing Asiya by talking about the state of Egypt at that time. So as I sort of already mentioned, Asiya, and we always in Islamic faith, we say, may Allah or may God be pleased with her when we talk about these important figures in our history. So Asiya, may Allah be pleased with her. She was the wife of Pharaoh, who ruled Egypt in ancient times. She was beautiful and a gentle type of queen with a very good heart. And so he loved her dearly. He really respected her and loved her dearly. He held her in a high position. So even though Pharaoh was a tyrant king, who at that time was killing innocent people, imprisoning women and children, because he had claimed himself as God, and anyone who sort of, did not agree with him had to be eliminated. And so if they believed in anything else besides him, he would have them crucified. And so the Quran, the noble Quran, the holy book of the Islamic faith, describes this sort of horrific state of the children of Israel by saying the following: "And remember, we delivered you from the people of Pharaoh. They set you hard tasks and punishments, slaughtered your sons, and let your women live. Therein was a tremendous trial from your Lord." So, God here just proclaims and acknowledges that they were going through, that the children of Israel were going through a very difficult time under the rule of Pharaoh. And so around this time, so under his persecution, the Pharaoh then is informed by a fortune teller that he would be overtaken by a man, power-wise, and he would be of the children of Israel. And so his solution to this problem was to order all male babies of the children of Israel to be executed. Okay, and so this was a very difficult kind of order, something very hard to swallow. So imagine being the wife, the family, the administration, or the people under Pharaoh to have to, it's easy to make these rules, but it's not really that easy to go ahead and do them. And so here I always take a note of what it was like for Asiya to be the wife of such a tyrant. So we mentioned that she had a good heart, she was very loving, but to watch him sort of personified or be this other person, to live with someone who has this other horrific side, it must have been a very, great challenge for her to see him as her husband, to see him as her partner, but at the same time to see him do this and to slaughter innocent people and to sort of, especially to go after children. And so at this time, we kind of interject her story by really mentioning Prophet Musa, which is Moses, right? So this is when his story intertwines with Asiya and Musa, may Allah be pleased with him. He was born at the time of Pharaoh. So the Arabic word for Pharaoh is Pharaoh. So I will use those sort of interchangeably. Which was really, he was born during a really politically charged time of history. So, we think about our times and we kind of don't forget that we've had these sort of politically charged, these kind of situations all throughout our history, times where things were tense. And so he was born right in the middle of this kind of time where you have this tyrant who's claiming to be God, where you have people that are sort of following him because they are afraid. You have maybe people in his administration that don't agree with him, but they have no choice, out of fear, they are following along. So the Pharaoh or Pharaoh of Egypt was really the dominant power in the land. So you really couldn't just decide that you would stand up to him or you would not follow what he said. So a short while before Prophet Musa was born, so Pharaoh, as I mentioned, was told that a child or a boy from the children of Israel would soon be born, and at whose hands Pharaoh's kingdom would be destroyed. So on hearing this, the king, of course, ordered all of his soldiers to eliminate every male child that was born to the children of Israel. Now, the soldiers of Pharaoh, how did they manage this? Well, they periodically went around to the homes of the children of Israel and they would check for these male babies. So they were kind of doing checkpoints, going home to home, doing raids, making sure that no male child, goes unnoticed. And so at this time, the mother of Musa, so in the Quran, she's mentioned as the mother of Musa many times. God sort of mentions or talks about the role that she played in, connecting Musa to Asiya, giving him that opportunity, and how it really felt to be a mother of a male child at that time. And so Musa's mother had prepared a plan for him. And so she's probably thinking, okay, how do I save my child? And when she heard the approach of the soldiers, so she knew they were coming, they were, checking the homes, she took Musa out of his basket and placed him in the river Nile. And this was, a river that was kind of in her backyard behind her house. So the Quran mentions these words in reference to what she went through. And so in chapter 28, verse 7, Allah says, "So we sent this inspiration to the mother of Moses. Suckle thy child, but when thou hast fears about him, cast him into the river. But fear not, nor grieve, for we shall restore him to thee, and we shall make him one of our messengers." And so God really promises her. He makes her a promise. Just trust me, do what I ask, and I will not let you down. I will bring your child back to you. In chapter 20, again, he mentions, and we inspired your mother with this. So he is, in this text, he is talking to Moses directly. And we inspired your mother with this. Put him into a chest and then put it into the river. The river will wash ashore and he will be taken by Pharaoh, an enemy of mine and his. And I blessed you with lovability of me, O Moses, so that you would be brought up under my watchful eye. And so there's a reference to what she went through. And then there was a reference in which God spoke directly to Musa, really speaking and maybe teaching him, because he was a baby, he would not remember. And so speaking to him and teaching him exactly what his mom or what his mother had to do and how she was inspired to do that by Allah. So the Quran mentions that the mother of Musa had a divine inspiration to place Musa in a basket and release him into the Nile. So in Islam, there are many types of divine communication that are mentioned in the Quran. And so this inspiration of the mother of Musa is one type in which she got a feeling. So she got a feeling inside of her, or an idea was placed inside of her, and she felt the need to do this action. So that's one type of sort of divine inspiration. Other types include things like in reference to maybe even animals, like Allah mentions specifically the bees, and we inspired the bee to travel to a specific flower to collect the pollen to then make the honey. And so a type of instinct can also be a divine inspiration. Divine inspiration can also be seeing a dream. So there are many characters over the Islamic history, where people will see dreams, right? Or I think even today we have in Islam a way to sort of ask God for help, where we make a sort of a supplication, and then a lot of people say, "Well, I received the answer in my dream," or I saw that answer. Should I take this job? Should I move? Should I do this? And many people say, "Well, I kind of saw a dream of myself in this location, or I saw a dream of myself in this job," and so that we believe that is also a type of inspiration. And then there's the direct type of inspiration, which is just revelation, where you have the angel Gabriel comes and directly speaks to usually a prophet with the purpose of revelation. So to bring text to teach people about religion. And so the mother of Musa here is mentioned in the Quran as having some sort of divine inspiration, divine communication with God to do this and to place Moses in that basket and place him on the river. So the basket in which Musa was placed into floated toward the palace of the Pharaoh. So once again, the Quran says, "Then the household of Pharaoh picked him up, that he may become for them an enemy and a cause of grief. Verily, Pharaoh, Haman, and their host were sinners. And the wife of Pharaoh said, 'A comfort of the eye for me and for you. Kill him not. Perhaps he may be of benefit to us, or we may adopt him as a son.' And they perceived not the result of that." And so here we sort of see the imagery where God says, so she placed him on the river and he just floated toward the palace, and someone from the palace found this basket. So the maidservant of Asiya discovered baby Musa on the river and brought him to the queen. "Oh, look what I found." After seeing him, Asiya instantly fell in love with the baby, and she brought him to her husband, to the Pharaoh, really seeking permission to keep the child of their own. They had no children of their own between them, and so she hoped for mercy for the child. And so Pharaoh's initial response was to reject her offer. He had a ruling and he was afraid for his own, for his continuation. And so he rejected. But after much convincing and due to really to his admiration and respect for Asiya, he agreed to keep the child, meaning that he would not kill the child, but did not really agree to loving him or taking him as his son. Okay, so pretty much due to his respect and love for her, he knew she maybe needed this. And so he allowed her to keep him as her son, but he did not agree to take him sort of as his loved one or anything like that. So it is mentioned in a lot of Islamic texts here that if Pharaoh had actually agreed to taking Musa as his son or as someone beloved to him, we may have had a whole different story of the prophet of Musa. He may have been amongst those who were saved, amongst those who had believed in the religion of Musa. And so due to her humility, Allah chose Asiya as the mother of Moses. So she became his adopted mother at this time. We do believe that Allah sort of puts things in the right location. So Pharaoh was not meant to be a believer, and so he did not sort of warm up to baby Musa. He kind of challenged him throughout his upbringing, and so really he did it for her. Okay, he did it for Asiya, and so he sort of gave her that gift. And so Asiya here, she shows mercy and love toward that child. And really that is not her own, but she felt a deep, instant connection to. And so here, I always like to sort of reflect on the strength and the really miraculousness of people who take other people's children in. So, the adopted parents, foster parents, caretakers of children that may not have had the best, hand dealt to them. And so how that love can be nurtured and how that unit can really become a family, even if there is no real blood relation in that relationship. And so Asiya really embodies that. She takes him in as her child and takes care of him. And even though her husband may not 100% agree, she probably didn't even try to include him. She was like, this is my baby, I will take care of him. So under Asiya's care, so now baby Musa has a role, and he refuses milk from any woman who comes to feed him. So he's an infant and he still needs his mother's milk. And they brought many different nursemaids and not a single one was able to feed him. And so here you see sort of the interjection or the introduction of Musa's sister. Okay, so Musa's sister, he had an older sister, that was told by her mother to follow the basket as it goes down the river. And so she has been watching from afar. So she followed the basket to see where it ended up. And I think throughout history, it is believed that she was actually working at the palace as well. So she had access to the palace. She had access to the queen. And so the sister who had been walking along the shore, watched sort of these events unfold from a distance. And when she saw that that they were not able to find someone to nurse the baby, she then suggests that she could recommend a nursemaid for baby Musa. Okay, so she had a great idea, someone that already was breastfeeding and could be the perfect person for baby Musa. So here the Quran says in chapter 28, verses 11 and 12, and she said to his sister, this is back to the mother of Musa. And she said to his sister, keep track of him. So she watched him from a distance while they were unaware. And we had caused him to refuse all wet nurses at first. So his sister suggested, shall I direct you to a family who will bring him up for you and take good care of him? Okay. And so, at this time, they were pretty, desperate. This baby now is under their care, is not feeding. We have to find a way to feed him. And so baby Musa, would only take milk from his mother. And therefore, Allah rewarded the mother of Musa for her patience and devotion to him by returning her child back to her. He had made that promise to her in that divine inspiration that we will take care of you. He will come back to you. So it is mentioned in the Quran that after placing her baby in the river, the mother of Musa had nothing on her mind besides her baby. And now this is just something that's not really surprising. So a mother places her child onto a basket into the river. She really was kind of very worried and fixated on the safety, what happened to him, the safety of her baby. So Allah says in the Quran, and the heart of Moses' mother became empty of all else. She had nothing on her mind besides Moses. She was about to disclose the matter concerning him. So she got to a point to where she was almost about to just burst and talk about and reveal herself. Had we not bound fast her heart, that she would be of the believers. It was God's help and intervention that allowed her to be patient and hold steadfast and sort of wait until that baby was returned to her. So it's a very difficult situation to be in. So it was all she could think about, therefore indicating that following Allah's command may not always be easy, right? It may not always be easy to do the right thing, but there are great rewards to be reaped if carried out. So her baby was safe from Pharaoh's command and returned to her. So because of her, because of her belief and sort of following that divine guidance, she was able to save her baby. It was not easy. It was a difficult task to do, but in the end, she saved her baby, and that baby was brought back to her. And so he remained with his mother, so his birth mother, all throughout his nursing years. So maybe the first 2 years of his life, he was with his mother. And Asiya would always have him brought to her whenever she wanted to see him. So Asiya was still in the picture. So he was with her as a nursemaid. He was living with his mother at home. So he was brought back to her home. But Asiya was very much present during this time. Whenever she needed to see him, whenever she missed him, he would be brought to her. So after this period, the nursing period, Musa was returned back to Asiya to live under the house, to live in the home of the Pharaoh, and to be, under his roof as Asiya as his mother and caretaker. And so this time is very important for Prophet Musa, because that's when sort of he became a man. That's when he learned the ins and out of being a Pharaoh and the government and how he led, and really also to see probably all the corruption and all the negative things, especially if Asiya is his guide during this time. So she grew to love him and respect him. And after Musa reached adulthood and then was presented with the prophethood from God, he began to call people to God's oneness. And so he was with her this whole time until he became an adult. And then he was presented this prophethood that now he should call to the oneness of God. He should call to the correct path. And so she was sort of along with him throughout this process. So to this new religion, he didn't have a lot of followers. As you can imagine, it's a very, fired up time. People are afraid of Pharaoh. He did not have mercy for anyone. So imagine, the children of Israel. It wasn't really a time to do something different. It wasn't the time to do something new. So he didn't have a lot of followers in the beginning. And so the news reached Asiya, and she came to know about Musa's new religion. So she heard that now her adoptive son is calling to a new religion, and she liked this new religion, and her heart started to believe in it. So she became a believer of the religion of Moses, and for years she kept her beliefs a secret. So she did not disclose it to anyone, as she worshipped Allah under guidance of Musa. So he knew, and he was guiding her, and he was sort of helping his mother in her continued belief and worship of God. And so they both, rejected Pharaoh. So Musa is now rejecting his father figure, and she is now rejecting her husband. So it is really unimaginable the amount of fear she may have felt to live under Pharaoh's roof and to be really afraid of the severe punishment that would come after, because she knew he was able to. She knew that he was doing it to others. And so she felt sorry for those who were being tortured for believing in Musa's religion. And her steadfast devotion to her husband was beginning to fade. So now, in the beginning, maybe she was younger, maybe she felt like she needed him. So as she got older, now Musa is really, Prophet Musa now was sort of like a person in her corner, maybe gave her strength. Now she starting to lose that influence, lose that ability or that fear of the Pharaoh. And so she stayed like this for many years while he called on to believers, and a lot of things happened in the life of Prophet Moses, but she was just maintained her faith and really maintained it in secret. And so her secret was finally disclosed by a hairdresser. And so the daughter of Pharaoh the hairdresser of the daughter of Pharaoh. And so we mentioned earlier that maybe Asiya had mentioned to Pharaoh, we don't have any children. And so here, so it's been deduced that maybe he had other wives and she was the wife of a different mother. And so he had a daughter, and this daughter had a hairdresser, and the hairdresser had accepted the religion of Moses. Okay. And so the daughter of Pharaoh learns that her hairdresser now was a follower of Moses, and the hairdresser tells her, well, the queen is also as well. And so the daughter goes straight to her father. Okay. And she informs Pharaoh about the hairdresser, which resulted in the, execution of the hairdresser, her and the whole family. But it was a little different when it came to his wife, the one he loved, the one that was his companion. And so then the daughter delivered this news to Pharaoh about Asiya's belief in the religion of Musa. And the Pharaoh really attempted numerous times to lead her astray, to bring her back, to persuade her not to believe. But her belief just grew stronger and stronger. So the more he tried, the more she was adamant about, sticking to her roots, sticking to her beliefs. So nothing really could tear her apart from her new creed, which she firmly believed in. He offered her clothes and jewelry and luxuries of being the queen, and she refused all of that for her belief. And so she turned away from his world, from the Pharaoh's world, and she was no longer afraid, and gave up her status as queen. And thus now she is suffering with everybody else. And so she was kind of under the protection of the Pharaoh as long as he didn't know. But as soon as he knew and he tried, well, he then cast her along with the people that were also being persecuted at this time, even though she was his wife. So here, I like to make a note that she really had no attachment to this world. So she was not defined, and I love this statement that I read, that she was really not defined by the wickedness of the man she married. So she was her own person. Who he was did not affect who she was. And so she may have been his wife, but she was a person and she was an individual who had a very strong belief. And so I like the fact that she stood up and she was not defined by the Pharaoh. And I think the idea that Pharaoh was her husband really sort of made her stand out. So the cruelest man, or one of the cruelest men in history, has the most pious women as his wife. And we see this example a lot in the Quran. We also see the opposite. And so we see the example of Prophet Lut, which is Lot, who his wife was a disbeliever. And so the Quran always makes sure that we get examples of everything. So we get good believing women and disbelieving women, good believing men and disbelieving men. And so the contrast is made between the Pharaoh's wife and the wife of Lot. Okay, that these two women were both, one had a bad husband and one had a, the greatest of husbands, a prophet, and how really that doesn't define who they are. And so Asiya here is not defined by the Pharaoh. She is who she is. So her mind and soul remained independent of her husband. Her heart was not a slave to his beliefs. She refused to submit to his tyranny and chose instead to devote her life to God. So it is narrated by one of the companions of Prophet Muhammad, through the narrations and stories that the Prophet Muhammad would tell his companions, that she even tried to run away. So she even tried to run away and seek guidance from God, but he found her and he arrested her. And then subsequently, she was tortured for 3 days by burning her body. Okay, so she did not, there was no mercy left from the Pharaoh once he found out that she rejected him. And yet she still said, I reject you and I do not want to have anything to do with you. So she still rejected him, even after sort of making her go through these, sort of torturing her. And so by now, after these events, he knew if she's not going to come back now, she is never coming back. And so he was enraged by this, and he ordered his men to give her the final blow. Okay, his mercy for her was gone, and he ordered his men to nail her to the ground and put a heavy boulder on her chest under the scorching sun. So at this time, this is how they punished people for not following orders, this is how Pharaoh punished the children of Israel for not believing that he was God. And so But during this horrible time, we see one of the most beautiful moments, okay, in Asiya's life. And it's mentioned specifically in the Quran in reference to her. And so during these last painful seconds, she says to the Lord, "My Lord, build for me a home with thee in paradise, and deliver me from Pharaoh and his work, and deliver me from the unjust people." So in her last moment, she says, "God, I am done. Take me." And what she does is she says, "I'm done. I need to go. I'm ready to come to you." But she aims high. She doesn't say, "Just enter me paradise." She says, "Build me a home in paradise." Not just a home in paradise. No, a home with you. So she wants to be in the ranks with God. She wants to be the neighbor of God. She wants her home to be the closest location she can be to God. And so what does she do? You aim high, right? This is sort of a theory that we all follow in our lives. If you don't aim high, you may never get it. And so always ask for the best. You'll never lose, right? Maybe you'll get it. And so throughout her life experiences, she had sacrificed, but at the end, she asked for the top. She said, "I want a house with you in paradise." And so it is narrated that during this pleading moment of hers, Allah showed her her place in paradise. And so this brought her great comfort, and she passed on to the next life with full reassurance that God will deliver her what he had promised. And so when we do a lot of our supplications, when we're asking God for help, or we even asking God to give us paradise, it is always taught to us from a younger age, we ask for the highest level of paradise. We don't want to just say we want to go to paradise. We want to go to the highest level. We want to be the closest to you, really following her example. Shoot high. Okay, maybe you'll end up on the 7th level or the 5th or whatever, but it's still paradise. But you always ask for the top. You always ask for the best. And she did that in her last moments. And so Asiya sent a perfect example for us to follow because she was a queen and she could really have had anything her heart desired. Despite that, she gave up her throne, her freedom, her luxuries in this world, really to gain God's mercy, and so that she could have that home in paradise. She had so much love for her religion that it came down to her last moments. Even though she was beaten and tortured, none of that meant anything for her. She was wise and she knew what really mattered is not the home she has in this world, but the home that she would eternally live in. And so she asked for the best of the eternal homes. So the story of Asiya is an everlasting example of a woman who chose the hereafter. She chose the hereafter over all the glitters of the world. And she, even though, God placed her as a wife of the most tyrant human being, maybe of all time, she was able to sacrifice all of that for God. So in the spirit of, March being Women's National History Month, I really found her to be an appropriate person to speak about. She shows great strength and courage while being pious and righteous. She took on a role of mother to an adopted son. She vouched for him with the greatest tyrant in the land, and then raised a man who became a prophet. When he was given the task to a new religion, she believed in him, supported him. She hid her belief from her husband as a means of protection. But when she was discovered, she was not ashamed of who she was and was willing to give up all the power and luxuries that came with being queen to follow the commands of God. The Prophet Muhammad has been quoted to have said, "The best of women amongst the people of paradise are Khadija bint Khuwaylid, Fatima bint Muhammad, Maryam bint Imran, and Asiya bint Muzahim, the wife of Pharaoh." So he mentions 4 women that have the greatest honor in the Islamic tradition, Khadija being his wife, Fatima being the Prophet's Muhammad's daughter, Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Asiya, the wife of Pharaoh. And so she has been placed into this amazing group of women due to her role, due to her conviction, due to her sacrifices, and due to her sort of belief and support of Prophet Moses. And so she's a great example of what all believing women should be. And I hope that in her example, we also get that reward that she asked for. And so a lot of us that sort of learn about her story, we take her story as an example, say, aim high, ask for the best, do your best, do what you can do, and then always ask for the best. You never know. You can't lose if you ask for the best. And so I hope that was a really sort of inspiring story. I really was inspired by that. I really enjoyed. She has always been someone, a figure in my mind. I actually have 3 daughters. I wanted to name one of my daughters Asiya, but when you sort of translate it to English, it starts sounding like Asia, and sort of it kind of didn't translate into the English language. My husband wasn't very excited about it either, but she kind of stayed in my heart. And so today, when I was given that opportunity to speak about someone who really was a strong figure, was just a beautiful story, she was the first person that came to my mind. And so I hope that she inspired you. I hope you learned something new, and that if anybody has any comments or any additions or wants to share the Christian point of view, the Jewish point of view of the story, I don't know. So teach me what version exists in your faith, and how are the details different? Are there some extra lessons that I didn't mention that you may have read about in learning about your faith? And thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
That was some awesome storytelling. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I would love to hear any questions. I do see Carrie has one comment here. I know Carrie Pillen.
Hi, that was really beautiful, and you said anything we can add, and I just feel very shortchanged that I didn't know so many of these things before, because so very little of this is in the Bible.
And I think a lot of our stories really, sometimes there are some of these stories that are really a lot more detail are found in the Old Testament. There's sometimes like these stories kind of interchange, where some details are found in the Quran, and then other details are really found in the older scriptures that maybe were not mentioned in the Quran. And so a lot of them do line up. I remember in college, I took a lot of these sort of religious courses. It was one of my interests. And so we would do a lot of comparisons. And this was one of the greatest things that I really learned, was that these texts sometimes complement each other. So, the Quran will mention one side of the story because it's trying to prove that point. But then the other text will then show a different point of view of that story because it's trying to show a different, or, sort of point out a different goal or a different idea. And so I like the fact that these stories kind of complement each other, and then they give us a broader picture once we learn all of the sides.
I know Larry emailed me in advance about a couple comments. I didn't know if you wanted to add a little bit. And you're on mute.
I think you're muted, Larry.
There you go.
How's that?
Yes.
My wife and I traveled to Egypt several years ago. We had a Muslim guide who was a very nice young man. And we spent 7 days with him on a tour. One of the things he explained was, at the time, the Hyksos ruled Egypt. True Egyptians always considered Pharaoh to be God. And his wife or his daughter would never, ever contradict him because he was, in their eyes, God. But with the Hyksos, he was not really God, as much as a true Egyptian pharaoh would be. So it wouldn't have been unusual for a wife or a daughter to rebel against him. The Hyksos ruled Egypt for quite a few years. And it also explains their harsh treatment of the Hebrews. Again, he said that the Egyptians, the true Egyptians, treated their slaves very well. They would not have been that cruel or that harsh with them. So we had a very good time, and that was his explanation.
And I really like your point because Jeremy shared a little bit of your comments, and we talked earlier about the fact that, you know, Pharaoh wasn't just the king, he was considered God. And so it wasn't just standing up to a king or standing up to, you know, a ruler. It was kind of on a religious base too. So you said, you know, these Egyptians really believed that he was God. And so standing up to him was really standing up to that religion, standing up to a holy figure. So the extent of the courage that it had to take to really, you know, go against someone that was believed to be God is just on a whole other level. It wasn't just like, I don't like your ruling, I think you're cruel. It was, I reject your ideology, which is something very difficult to deal with. I think people who, for example, have children or family members that maybe change religions, they kind of go through something like that, but nothing close, right? This is, it means they're rejecting your way of life, which is very difficult for someone, you know, that raised you. And so this is something on a whole other level. This is something that, you know, he believed to be God, the only, you know, figure in this religion. And then you as his wife or his daughter now are saying, I don't believe you. And so it's just tremendous, really, the gravity really of the situation at that time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Do a couple other comments. Would anybody like to ask their question verbally? I see Debbie.
Okay, can you speak to what the Jewish texts say about Asiya? I have read the story of Moses and the bulrushes in the Christian Bible many times. I'm not really, I'm not exactly sure. Does anybody know about how she is? I think we spoke a little bit earlier with Jeremy that there's sort of a discussion whether it was like his wife or his daughter. There's a little bit of discrepancy there. There's the wife figure and there's the daughter figure. And so if someone has any comments, please join in.
I guess I could say a little bit about this. From what I know from growing up in like Jewish day schools and whatnot, the wife of Pharaoh really isn't discussed. And like you were saying, the wife versus daughter, everything that I grew up learning about was about the daughter of Pharaoh. There's also a thing that comes up where the Pharaoh in the beginning of the story is not the same Pharaoh in the end of the story. So it's sort of the next generation Pharaoh. It's his son. So that could be why, like, it could be. And another thing that I learned a bit about ancient Egypt is that there was a tendency for, especially among the pharaoh's brother and sister, to marry. So it could be that the daughter and the wife is the same person with different pharaohs, depending on what time frame of reference you have. So again, that wasn't really discussed very much when I was growing up in Jewish texts. It's usually just discussing the daughter of Pharaoh who raised Moses.
And I agree, Jason. I've actually heard that. You reminded me that. So Pharaoh is a title for like king or like president. And so I remember reading something about that the Pharaoh at the time of the birth of Moses may not be the same Pharaoh that he stands up to later on, that he, you know, that challenges Moses, that doesn't believe in him, the one that eventually, you know, dies. And so I think I think I read something about that it may be a different king. Like you said, it's the son, which maybe makes the story a little different, because then she's not really standing up to her husband. She may be standing up to the next generation. And so as the figure, and then you bring in the point that they used to marry their sisters. And so it may be the same person. And so, yeah, gives some really great insight.
It gets complicated fast.
Yeah.
I see Carrie's asking where we can find the sources that you used in addition to the Quran.
So the most of the sources that I used were from the Quran, were their verses. There were a few of the sayings of the Prophet, which was that last one that I mentioned, and she was amongst the four. Those are just found in the books of Hadith, the sayings of the Prophet. I can share that. And then a lot of my resources were I was just reading articles. People have written about her experiences. So I just kind of took and pulled and shared. And I have a list of those articles that I read, and I can put them in the chat. So I cited them at the bottom of my document. So I can copy and paste that. And if you would like to read a little bit more, you can do that.
What other comments or questions or points of discussion do you want to have? I know another thing Carrie asked earlier that I was interested in kind of expanding on too is God more directly speaks to the, or you know, the you talked a little bit about the inspiration, right?
Right.
The connection between God and the mother of, oh, let's see, Pharaoh's wife at that point, or mother of
The
Moses.
mother of Moses. The
Mother
mother
of Moses is to some extent a little more direct than in the Hebrew Bible, and I was just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, so there's a lot of discussion. So I think a lot of divine communication is usually linked to prophethood. Like a prophet has direct communication with God and then is told to do something. But there have been so many examples of other people that may have not reached the level of prophethood that do have these connections, do have this communications with God. And so I mentioned just like a layman's communication where they might see it in a dream or have a feeling. And so the mother of Moses, I think, is a little bit higher than that. So it's not a matter of she saw it in a dream or so she had this very strong inclination to do this. Okay. And I think there had to be something a little bit more extensive because she feels nervous and then she is then told that it's going to be okay. She is nervous. Then she feels like God promises that he will return her baby to her. So I think it may be a little bit more than just a feeling. It might be the sort of like divine communication, but there are no reports that, for example, an angel came down and told her, or we kind of link it to Prophet Abraham when he was told to go and slaughter his son, and so that wasn't really a message delivered. That was a same idea. It was an inspiration that came to him that told him to do that act, and it's the same idea. And to believe and to have patience. It may not sound like a very great idea right now, but if you believe, God sees sort of the full picture. And so the communication with her is mentioned numerous times in the Quran. She's one of the women that have been mentioned. She is mentioned more than once about her divine connection and her divine reliance on God and how he brought that level of peace. He brought her a level of, he brought that courage to her, like the verse that I mentioned where she started kind of losing it a little bit. She started freaking out. My God, my son, where is he? And then God brought that sort of serenity onto her heart and he gave her that reassurance. And I think for the mother of Musa, it was just kind of like this feeling, the sense of peace, the sense of direction. It wasn't any true communication. And then it links to the other types of divine intervention. So we talked about even the instinct of animals. We believe that's divine intervention. God tells these animals to do these actions. And then you see it in a dream. And then there's actual communication where you have an angel that most of the time embodies a human form and speaks to the prophets, usually in relation to revelation. So rules and regulations and how to obey God and what is right and what is wrong. And so she just, she's mentioned with this inspiration, sort of gives her a very special status that it's a little bit different, that she felt like this is the right thing to do. And I think she knew that there was a divine hand in it. She knew it wasn't just like, oh, this is my great idea and I should do it. She knew there was a divine hand in that inspiration. And so, you have many types of believers, right? Before any true religion really came with Moses, there were still believers, people who had connections with God, people who were close to God. And, we believe she was one of those.
I'm curious. So this story is told at a certain time of year in a cycle in the Jewish tradition, and it's also a story that is often has a very pediatric version of it. And so I'm curious, both like how you were introduced to the story, and were you introduced to it with a heroine, or was it part of a bigger story where there was more of a male influence? And how do you see it woven into the prayer ritual or storytelling in today's Muslim ritual?
So as a child, I think when we teach about sort of historical events, we always, with children, we start off with the prophets. And so the prophets for us, there's 25 main messengers of God that sort of delivered a message to different people throughout humanity. So we were introduced to the prophet Musa. Okay, right? The story of Prophet Moses. And so as children, we see these sort of, cartoons, or we're told at, Sunday school about the stories of the prophets. And then I think that's sort of the first step that was really taken. And then as we get past the kindergarten, elementary, then we start being introduced to the women. So other people that had importance besides the prophets. So our prophets were sort of like the first go-to, and we give equal importance to all prophets. And so we go through one by one, and we learn the prophet of, the story of Jesus and Moses and Elias and Ibrahim and Adam. And so we go through them as stories. And then we talk about the figures. So now there are some accessory figures that also played an important role that are also mentioned in the Quran. So here we introduce like the Queen of Sheba, we introduce the wife of Asiya, sort of as storytelling for the children. So when we get a little bit older, and now it's like high school, now we can sort of talk about the role of these, we're sort of, and as girls and boys both become more interested in what role women played in spreading their religion and being sort of important figures, then we delve in more into like, what was the role of Mary? What was the role of Asiya? What was their role? There are many scholarly discussions that give these women very high levels that I've read that, some people consider Mary to almost, to most likely be a prophet. Some people have even given her that kind of level in Islam. And so Asiya's up there. They are mentioned together. Many times there are mentioned Mary and Asiya together. So if you are glorifying Mary and it's Mary and Asiya, then Mary and Asiya both receive that glorification. And so it kind of progresses with the knowledge. And so as you delve into the knowledge with children, you introduce her as one of the most important figures. She was the adopted mom of Musa. She helped him be who he is. But obviously, as you get deeper and deeper and sort of go more into her story, then you start seeing kind of like the struggles that she went through, what her end really was like. We focus on she asked for the best, and so we motivate our children to ask for the best. So we take these kind of pediatric level lessons and we teach that to the children. And then, as they do more scientific work or more research, then you kind of discover the little details of the story. I think a lot of our Islamic teachings focus more about what the lesson is, right? So we focus really less about the little details of her life, but more about what can we learn from this person's experience. And so I think we try to present that. When it comes to prayers, we don't really include the story of Asiya in praying, but we use her supplication to pray. And so a lot of the stories that are given in the Quran, they also give us ideas of how we can ask God for things. And so there's a lot of mention of the supplications of Abraham, how Abraham used to communicate for God. And there's a long section or chapter that talks about specific ways, terminology of how Abraham used to ask God for things. Give me protection, protect my children, grant me paradise. And so we use that same terminology when we make our supplications in prayer or after prayer. So Asiya has the same idea. We want to use her supplication in our prayers. God, I ask you for the highest house in paradise, and I want that house to be with you. And so that's how we kind of use her story and sort of intertwine that into our, into worship. I hope that answered your question. Thank you.
I just wanted to make a comment, if that's okay. First of all, thank you, Nassiba. Wow, that was very informative. Also, what I wanted to add was the fact that Moses is the most mentioned prophet in the Quran, and also the children of Israel. So it's only befitting the fact that Asiya is also, mentioned, because the story of Moses is like in so many different chapters in the Quran, and there are like 1 or 2 chapters which is just devoted for his story. And so yeah, and then we like the supplications that she made, that we also make in our prayers as well. So thank you for putting the story together so beautifully.
Thank you, Emel. You are my example.
Oh.
That's very that's very sweet. Does anybody else have any particular questions or notes that they they kind of found when hearing this story from another perspective or a similar perspective?
A comment that first we began with the Bible as a text, and then later on somebody divided it into chapters and verses. So in the Bible, we have this wonderful section of women as heroes, which really starts in chapter 1 of Exodus with verse 15 with the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, who are great heroes as well, who disobeyed Pharaoh's order to kill the young male babies. And then that leads into then this story of more women as heroes, which includes the story that we had today. Thank
you. Can you tell me that passage? I would like to read it on my own. You said Exodus.
Exodus chapter 1, verse 15. And to the end of the chapter, and then that brings us to the story that you taught for us today. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Well, any others? Any other questions or comments?
I just have kind of a personal question, which is, you're a professor of biology and at a Catholic college as a Muslim learned woman. And I know we have 2 minutes left, so like that's a whole nother hour. But could you just tell us a little bit about how perhaps your faith informs your work?
So I was introduced to CSM, College of St. Mary, as an adjunct. I had taken like 10 years off from doing any sort of professional work, and then I needed to go back in. So they took me in as an adjunct, and it was a great experience for me. I had the same kind of ideas, how am I going to fit in a Catholic university? My brother was actually also a professor at a Catholic university. He was at Notre Dame. So he gave me a little insight. He's like, the Catholic side is usually a little separate. I did not have any of those experiences. They were super welcoming, and they actually encourage that kind of discussion. And so I think me being there, being present, really encouraged a lot of open discussions, a lot of inclusivity there's a lot of Muslim girls at the College of St. Mary, because it's just an all girls school. A lot of the girls feel safer, parents feel safer sending them there at a small location. And so they reached out to me to help sort of bring about awareness to what are the needs of the Muslim girls. And so I felt that my faith aligned morally greatly. Okay, so when you talk about morality, we all have kind of the same basis. And so on a moral value, on what they believed in, what they encouraged, the fact that they encouraged girls to succeed and to be well, and to also hold to their faith and their morality, and to promote inclusivity. They're very good about making sure we have a diverse campus, one of our bigger goals. And so I think I fit into that goal of the university. And then I hope that I'm enriching that with my presence. And so I give them I tell them that I'm somewhat a little involved with some tri-faith, and Sister Marianne is on the tri-faith board. So we have a lot of connections there. We have a lot of conversations. She's been a great advocate for me and to make me feel included. And I think it just shows that we may have different religions. That's the whole point of trifaith, correct? That we may have different religions, but our essence there's a lot of middle ground. And so she builds that community on campus as well. And so I've had a great experience there. And I think, I have not had any issues with my faith. We helped set up a prayer room last spring before the pandemic hit. She wanted to have a prayer space for the girls on campus. We are talking about providing, halal meat at the cafeteria. We have Ramadan coming up, which the girls might be fasting, and the breaking of the fast is outside the normal dinner time. So we're having discussions about how can we provide meals for the girls at a later time. And so, there's a lot of healthy conversation. And so I'm really enjoying that experience. I think it's helped me a lot. And I think it's helped both sides. It's helped both of us sort of grow. And really, when we talk about inclusivity, to actually embody it and actually do it. Thank you for the question, Wendy.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here, Nassiba. And I know that I enjoyed this conversation a lot. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
One of many, I hope.